We are through approximately the first 3 weeks of the Donald Trump administration, a little bit more. And there have been a lot of executive orders going around, and there's a lot of very misguided analysis about how we got here. I have a written piece which is probably going to be forthcoming, although in this video I'm going to explain a lot of how we got here, how a president is able to fundamentally reshape American life through executive order. The president has fundamentally altered the structure of government and public life through his use of the executive order and through involving corporations in government operations. He's shuttered the United States Agency for International Development. That's in the courts. He has done away with initiatives related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. He's abrogated the rights of transgender persons and other sexual minorities. He's promised a lot more to come. So, most galling to institutionalists, Trump has relied on special government employees, most of whom have no official government positions, to alter national policy on issues that are important to a lot of people in a very short time. With all this blending of executive power and corporate speed, it's worthwhile to reflect on the history of the executive order, which is creating a new deep state in a Trumpian guise. To begin with, it's worth noting, it's very important to note, that the executive order is not enumerated in Article 2 of the Constitution, which governs the powers of the executive branch. The Supreme Court has given its blessing to the executive order in a body of case law that's too numerous to present here. And every United States president, with the exception of William Henry Harrison, who died too fast, has used the executive order at least once. Congress can theoretically override the executive order with a 2/3 vote of both houses, but congressional attempts to override executive orders have never succeeded, not one time, because presidents can veto the congressional override. So this gives the presidency a great deal of power to set power through the executive order. Courts have given the president the blessing over the last 200 years, and it's very difficult for the legislature to do anything about it, even if it wanted to. So the 20th century, and particularly the Great Depression, brought about a dramatic increase in the number and the scope of executive orders. Many of Roosevelt's New Deal programs were dramatically expanded in scope beyond the were dramatically expanded in scope far beyond what Congress could have reasonably intended. And some of those New Deal programs, some of the case law, wound its way through the Supreme Court until the Truman administration, all through the Great Depression, all through World War II, before Franklin Delano Roosevelt's executive orders in the middle 1940s were challenged by the courts because they went too far. It took the courts 10 years to decide a lot of this case law, in some cases more. So the New Deal also brought about an astronomical rise in the number of federal civil servants and the scope of their authority. Those people had to come from someplace. A growing federal bureaucracy had to come from somewhere. And American corporations were the best place to look. They had people with expertise in the law, because we have allowed corporate lobbying since the end of the Reconstruction era. So now we're just incorporating those people in the United States Civil Service as of the end of as of the New Deal programs. This causes what people call a revolving door effect, where government employees and corporate employees are increasingly interchangeable in their functions and in their expertise. And this is a phenomenon which makes it very easy for employees to transfer from governmental to corporate positions and back again. We started seeing this very early with the Dulles brothers, international lawyers who became secretaries of state under Eisenhower. Not a new phenomenon. Now it's just happening a lot more. After World War II, the interchangeable of government and corporate expertise literally became a national security question. The National Security Act was a major abrogation of congressional power to the executive branch. Congress had been pretty much in charge of the intelligence community. The National Security Act of 1947 created the CIA and created the National Security Council. And this dramatically expanded executive orders again, because the president was now making executive orders about covert operations, which Congress wouldn't even question. The presidency in the Cold War was given a great deal of deference, and by the time Nixon came around, it was basically too late to do. Now the president can tell Congress that not only is he constitutionally justified to rule by decree, but he can cite national security and a whole body of national security legal precedent that's very deferential to presidential power, to back himself up. And the fact that the National Security Act placed the intelligence community under civilian oversight, under the oversight of the executive branch, only added to this revolving door effect. So this led the historian Arthur Schlesinger to coin the term the imperial presidency in 1968. He describes a situation where the president rules without democratic oversight. It's very hard to hold the president accountable through democratic norms. And nowadays we use the term deep state. It's more evocative. And depending on where one sits on the political spectrum, the term deep state has different meanings. Left-wing people tend to view the deep state as this cozy relationship between government and corporations. They often include organized crime into that mix. And right-wingers tend to use the term deep state to convey their worries about a conspiracy undermining morality and the American way and doing away with mom and apple pie and little baby geese, that sort of thing. So under the second Trump administration, the use of executive orders over the last 3 weeks combines the worst fears of rightists and leftists, even though the rightists are cheering about it. Trump is a convicted felon. He makes no bones about his admiration for organized crime figures and how quickly and efficiently they exercise power. So he's using these special government employees of Musk, to reshape government, supposedly in the name of making it more efficient. These people have never been elected to anything. These people have never passed the civil service exams. These people are doing whatever they want, supposedly in the name of making government more efficient. So Trump is shuttering USAID because he accuses it of government waste. Musk's companies are administering the shutdown, people who've never been elected to anything, and who will only be removed from their positions if Congress overrides the executive order by 2/3 vote in both houses. A greater potential for government waste can hardly be imagined, even though the rationale is supposedly to try to do away with government waste. It's going to be extremely difficult for Congress to override Trump through statutory law. You need 2/3 votes of both houses, because Trump can veto your override, and you need 2/3 of Congress to override a presidential veto. So it's time to face facts. Through executive orders, Donald Trump has initiated a new era in political life. Since the New Deal and the National Security Act, government and corporate interests have worked relatively harmoniously together. In Trump 2, we have a new phenomenon where corporations can get rid of the middleman and the government bureaucracy so long as the president is amenable to corporate blandishments. It's very hard to see any way in which citizens or concerned pressure groups can contest any corporation which has the president's ear. This is what I'm calling the new Trumpian deep state. Trump is willing and able to use this power. Now, I've barely mentioned the federal courts, and that's for a reason. They are a complete non-entity. Questioning Roosevelt's executive orders took 10 years in the courts. The courts have no actual enforcement arm. The enforcement arm for the courts, the only people that are directly answerable to the courts is the United States Marshals Service. The Justice Department is part of the executive branch. Trump can probably just tell the Justice Department, we're not going to enforce these court rulings, even if the courts rule against him. The court system is completely rigged in favor of Trump. It's some of the most business-friendly federal courts we've seen in a very long time. It's very hard to envision them overruling anything Trump says. And if they do, Trump can just say, okay, U.S. Marshal Service, there's about 8 or 10 of you, I dare you. I dare you enforce this thing. It's going to take 10 years to override these executive orders in the courts if they get overridden. And if they get overridden, there's no way to enforce it. And if the president chooses not to enforce it, he has very broad powers. In the Trump versus United States case last summer, it's very hard to hold a president criminally accountable for anything he does, and by extension, anything he doesn't do while in office. This is the president's world. This is the president's world. Everybody else is just living in it.